"Sir, this area is restricted. You'll need to leave." He was just an old man in a faded bomber jacket, boots scuffed from another life. No one knew who he was. No name tag, no stripes, no explanation. But as the young recruit repeated his command, 4 Navy SEALs stood up in absolute silence. And what happened next wasn't about rank. It was about respect that had been earned long before any of them were born.
It was just after 1300 hours when the cafeteria filled with recruits. Boots thudded across tile, metal trays clattered, the smell of starch, salt, and steam. And at the far table, near the window, sat a man no one recognized. Old, gray stubble, weather-worn hands, a flight jacket with a barely visible patch, so faded it looked like a shadow of history. He wasn't eating, just sitting with a cup of black coffee, staring out past the barbed fence line. A few recruits whispered, "Who let this guy in? Security slipping?" Then came Private Rourke, all confidence and clean uniform, who walked over with the tone of someone trying to impress. "Sir, this area is for active personnel only. I'll have to ask you to step out." The old man didn't even turn, just sipped his coffee. "Sir?" Silence. Rourke's voice rose. "Now, please." And then, 1 Navy SEAL stood up, followed by a second, then a third, and a fourth, all in sync. Not one said a word. They weren't sitting together. They hadn't signaled each other. But something in the air had changed. Their presence wasn't loud, but the silence slammed into the room like a warning. Private Rourke froze. One of the SEALs walked past him, slow, deliberate, and placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of the old man. Another stood behind him, arms crossed. The message was clear. This man doesn't leave. They didn't salute him. They didn't need to. Because an old man was told to leave, but then 4 Navy SEALs stood up in silence. And suddenly, everyone understood. This wasn't just some visitor. This was a man who had once stood where they now stood, and far beyond.
They didn't speak his name, not until someone whispered it. "Wait, is that Commander Ellis?" Silence dropped like a lead curtain. The recruits who'd been laughing earlier suddenly stopped chewing. The ones who rolled their eyes now lowered their gaze. Because Commander Ellis wasn't just a name. He was a ghost legend from another war. The kind of name that instructors mention only once when they think you can handle the truth. 10 confirmed extractions behind enemy lines. 3 operations so black they were never recorded. He disappeared after Operation Daggerfall, presumed dead. But here he was, drinking bad coffee in a cafeteria that no longer remembered him. Private Rourke backed away like someone realizing they'd just yelled at a lion in disguise. He didn't salute. He just moved, quietly. The 4 Navy SEALs didn't break formation. They didn't need to explain their action. They stood in silence because their silence spoke louder than medals. Ellis finally looked up. His eyes, gray and calm, scanned the room. Not judging, just remembering. "I came to see the next generation. Didn't mean to interrupt." Nobody dared respond, because when an old man was told to leave, but then 4 Navy SEALs stood up in silence, the room learned something. Respect doesn't come from stripes. It doesn't come from shouting commands. It comes from surviving things that others wouldn't even believe. And in that moment, every soldier in that room, from boot to brass, stood a little straighter. Not because they were ordered to, but because they knew they were in the presence of someone who once carried entire missions on his back and never asked for thanks. Nobody had taught them how to react to this. These weren't cadets anymore. They were soldiers, trained, hardened, sharp. But this wasn't about drills or tactics. This was about presence. Because when an old man was told to leave, but then 4 Navy SEALs stood up in silence, it wasn't just a correction. It was a silent, thunderous lesson. Colonel Hastings walked in just as the silence reached its peak. He paused mid-step. His eyes found the old man, and then the 4 SEALs. He knew Ellis. Everyone above a certain rank did. His jaw tightened, not in anger, in recognition. "You're not interrupting, Commander," he said, nodding once. "You're the reason any of us are here." Ellis only gave a tired smile. Just wanted to see if the Corps still stood for something. That's when the Colonel did something nobody expected. He snapped to attention and saluted. The entire cafeteria followed, like a slow-building wave, not from command, not from fear, but from earned, inherited reverence. No cameras, no orders, just raw respect for a man who had bled quietly so others could wear their uniforms loudly. The SEALs remained still, like granite statues. Ellis stood slowly, bones cracking with age, but posture still unshakable. He said, "Don't salute me. Salute the ones who didn't come back." And with that, he turned and walked toward the door he had been told to leave from just minutes ago. No one stopped him now. No one dared. Some stood in silence. Others clenched their fists. Because in every soldier's mind, one truth echoed. They had nearly disrespected the foundation their entire system stood on. And all it took was 4 SEALs standing up to remind them. It took only 30 seconds for him to walk out the door, but the silence he left behind stayed for hours. No one spoke first, not even the Colonel, not even the SEALs, because when an old man was told to leave, but then 4 Navy SEALs stood up in silence, the silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. In the far back, one of the youngest recruits, barely through basic, whispered to his bunkmate, "That's who I want to be." Another just nodded, holding back tears he didn't understand. Not from sadness, but from awe. They had all seen medals. They had all memorized ranks. But this was the weight of legacy. It wasn't about what Ellis had done. It was about what he refused to stop standing for, even decades after he'd put away the uniform. The SEALs eventually returned to their seats, calm and unreadable, but something in their posture had changed. Straighter, heavier, almost reverent. Later that night, word spread across the base like wildfire. The man they tried to escort out saved a SEAL team in 1997. He held off an entire platoon with a radio and a blade. He trained half the guys who trained us. Not all of it was true, but the truth didn't matter as much as what was felt. And what they all felt was shame and pride. Shame for almost disrespecting a living chapter of their history. Pride for being part of the same story. From that day forward, a quiet shift swept the base. Fewer jokes during roll call, more eyes lifted during the anthem, and every time a senior vet walked by, especially one with old scars and quiet steps, they stood a little straighter. Not because they were told, but because now they knew. When an old man is told to leave and 4 Navy SEALs stand up in silence, it's not just a story, it's a message, a warning, and a reminder that some legends walk quietly until someone tries to push them aside.